that is something he has struggled with for his entire life. He does not exercise and condition his body, so he is not in good shape physically. Because this man is overweight, he is neglected and made fun of by his peers. The way his physical body looks to him, and especially other people, is something he is done constantly battling with, so he decides that it is time he took care of the problem. After purchasing a gym membership and exercising every day for a few months, this man is completely satisfied with the results. Not only does he feel a sense of accomplishment in himself, but his peers begin to take notice of his new lifestyle. But his love for exercise is slowly starting to become an obsession. This man that used to devote more of his time to his spiritual practices is now neglecting these same practices more and more, so he has more time to condition his physical body. This man has encountered idolatry. Statistics reveal that we are spending more time on improving our physical health rather than our spiritual health. In June of 2014, the Washington Post conducted a survey which they called 10 Maps that show how much time Americans spend grooming, eating, thinking, and praying. According to this survey, the average American spends anywhere from less than an hour to 1.5 hours per week devoted to religious activities, and about 6 hours per week exercising or participating in sports activities. So, the average American devotes about 25% more of their time to physical fitness activities, rather than spiritual activities such as attending church, reading the Bible, and praying. In 2013, the Bureau of Labor Statistics American Time Use Survey conducted a test to see how much time we devote to religious activities. They found that Americans spend, on average, only about 3 minutes per day devoted to their religious activities. Now, both of these studies are based off of the time management use of Americans. So the data presented is probably a smaller number, considering that not all Americans are Christians. But it is clear that as a culture founded under Christian ideals, we're devoting a significantly larger amount of time to physical fitness activities. In this presentation, I argue that some Christians view exercise as an important spiritual discipline, but exercise does not belong in the category of spiritual formation, because when it is placed in this category, we run into the dangerous problem of idolatry. It is also important that we provide a clear definition of what spiritual formation is. Exercise does not belong in the category of spiritual formation, and so therefore we should understand it as a way to further develop our spiritual disciplines, which in turn help to cultivate us to become more like Jesus. So, as Christians, we need to recognize the fact that our physical health on earth does not factor into the spiritual health necessary for becoming more Christ-like. While conditioning our bodies may not be detrimental when done in moderation, there are consequences for prioritizing exercise over spiritual disciplines. Now we need to provide a clear definition of what spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines are. Dallas Willard, well known for his many writings on Christian spiritual formation, said, "Christian spiritual formation is the process through which the embodied reflective will takes on the character of Christ's will." The embodied reflective will that Willard is talking about is our human ability to make conscious decisions. Our spiritual formation is our decision of whether or not to emulate the life that Jesus lived on earth. The life he lived was one that was not of self-gratification. Jesus made choices that helped others, did not glorify himself, and that obeyed his Father. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus calls upon us to take up our cross and follow him. As Christians, we are all on a journey with spiritual formation as the destination. On this journey, our spiritual disciplines are what constitute the steps along the way. So because our spiritual disciplines make up the steps on this journey of spiritual formation, we can define spiritual disciplines as tasks that embody the character of Christ's will. One of the major problems we encounter when our physical health is prioritized over our spiritual health is idolatry. But what makes something an act of idolatry? J.C. Ryle, the first Anglican bishop of Liverpool, said, "Idolatry is a worship in which the honor due to God in Trinity and to him only is given to some of his creatures or to some invention of his creatures." According to Ryle, we can consider the prioritizing of exercise over our spiritual disciplines an act of idolatry because it is a worship of ourselves and it is a worship of our bodies. Now, idolatry is something that surrounds us in all the modern culture we see today. So how can we prepare ourselves to face this constant desire for idolatry? To face this desire, we need to be reminded of what the benefits of spiritual disciplines are. The man that lives in Valencia needs to be reminded of what his life was like before he began neglecting his spiritual disciplines. If this man decides to return to his former ways, he will be at peace, knowing that God still desires to have a relationship with him. Now, someone opposed to this thesis might bring up the 1981 film, Chariots of Fire. In this movie, Eric Liddell, a Scottish Christian, claims that he runs for the glory of God. He refused to run in the men's 100-meter race in the 1924 Olympic Games because it was being held on a Sunday. Running in these races and training and exercising in preparation for them helped him to feel the pleasure of God. If one were to ask Liddell if he believed that we have a potential for spiritual formation through exercise, he would certainly agree because he said he felt the pleasure of God when he ran these races. But the concern arises when one begins to idolize exercising to a point where it interferes with our spiritual disciplines. I am not saying that exercise is a bad thing, simply that we should follow Liddell's example. Liddell was given an opportunity to glorify himself in running in this race. But just as Jesus is not self-glorifying, Liddell chose not to glorify himself by respecting the Sabbath and not running in this race. He had the ability to find a balance between his physical disciplines, and this is something that as Christians, we should seek to emulate. Once the man that lives in Valencia is reminded of what his life was like before he began neglecting his spiritual disciplines, he resolved that he needed to find a balance. He realized the importance of his journey of spiritual formation, and so he decided to make it the main priority of his life. This man still exercises a few days out of each week to be healthy, but he does not let it consume his every thought. This man has found a perfect balance, and he is completely satisfied with his new lifestyle. Exercise and fitness is something that as Christians, we can and should enjoy. As Christians living in the 21st century, we are faced with many earthly activities and possessions that can cause us to become distracted. We run into a problem when these activities, such as exercise, become idols in our lives. It is important for us to realize that we need to prioritize our spiritual disciplines over exercise. This is why exercise does not belong in the category of spiritual formation. Thank you.